Howdy, I'm Joe.
And I'm Andrew.
Got a great episode for you today. So not only are we going to be talking about Havre de Grace in the War of 1812, but we're also going to be talking about a specific Marylander who operated through the war, before the war, through the war, and then also had an impact on Maryland after. All right, so today our tale starts with a man called John O'Neill. Born in Ireland, immigrated to the fledgling United States in the colonial period. A little bit too late to serve in the Revolution, but went on to serve under Light Horse Harry Lee, Robert E. Lee's daddy.
Earlier, Joe was talking about the Whiskey Rebellion. And I don't know if I'm the only one in the room, but I have no damn clue what that is. So if you wouldn't mind enlightening us on that, that'd be swell.
Yeah, totally. You know, as a Pennsylvanian, that should be a bigger deal for you. But in any case, that outside. Also, peek behind the curtain for listeners. Andrew is actually a Pennsylvanian. Past that. So, Americans being annoyed about alcohol is not a new thing, right? So it's not new to Prohibition. It's not new during any of the other time periods where there have been riots and fusses about alcohol. This isn't really about the alcohol. It's more about attacks on the corn and rye used in whiskey. So what ended up happening is the U.S. Congress after the Revolution needed cash. So in a similar move to the British that caused the Revolution, the Congress just decided, hey, I'm going to tax things that make whiskey, corn and rye, and that's it. Just, deal with it. Well, nobody liked that, so armed rebellions popped up in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and a couple other states. George Washington himself had to march to quash the rebellions. Yeah.
Well, it seems like no one ever learns anything throughout history then, does it?
No. Still a lot of taxes. So anyway, back to John O'Neill. So serves under Light Horse Harry Lee for that. After that, joined the U.S. Navy. So this guy's everywhere, right? So this guy missed the Revolution. He's in the militia for the Whiskey Rebellion. Then he joins the Navy. Doesn't do much. And also, future plug to other episodes, listeners, Maryland has a storied history of, and I'm talking about the Annapolis Naval Academy. John Rogers, also from Havre de Grace. Stephen Decatur, from where I'm from on the Eastern Shore. All great Commodores of the young American Navy from Maryland. Anyway, John O'Neill, not one of them, didn't do much in the Navy. But when he got out of the Navy, he moved to a tiny little town called Havre de Grace. So a good question to ask here, I think, is like, what is Havre de Grace and why do I care? So Havre de Grace is a tiny little town, and we'll do a map overlay that'll show this pretty good. But it is a tiny little town on the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay as the Susquehanna River dumps out to it. The Susquehanna River runs from, of course, the Chesapeake Bay at its endpoint all the way up to a place in New York, right around the Finger Lakes and like Ithaca area, Rochester up that way.
Now, that would have been unimpeded by the dam that's currently there. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct, exactly. So today, for those of you not familiar with Maryland, there's a big old dam that stops river flow right about at the PA line. Well, still on the Maryland side, but anyway, it comes down from like Peach Bottom, PA, that area.
The Conowingo.
Yep. So Conowingo Dam. So the Susquehanna is a really important river at the time because a lot of timber and things get floated down the river from upstate New York and Pennsylvania, along with like corn, barley, all of your good crops. Gets floated down the river all the way to Havre de Grace, where it's then put on big old barges and sent down to like huge ports like Baltimore, around the Delaware River up to Philadelphia, and Richmond in Virginia. So Susquehanna River and Havre de Grace in particular are really important for shipping goods in the early 1800s. So
kind of looking at what like the Mississippi would have been, but like the East Coast equivalent of that or something along those lines.
Yeah, so not such a grand scale, but pretty much the same idea. Additionally, Havre de Grace mattered because Havre de Grace formed what was called Old Post Road, which stretched from, I want to say like Virginia, if not more south, all the way up through New York. So like I-95 for any of my East Coast folks and the I-5 for anybody on the West Coast. And if you're in the Midwest, I'm really sorry. Not that familiar with your highways. But anyway, big transportation hub where stagecoaches, mails, dignitaries, Sorry, I think I said males. Male. I'm sure males were on the road, but I meant male.
I'm sure there was quite a few males riding on it, but that's all right.
But anyway, mail and a bunch of other important things went up and down that road. And so the Susquehanna River, you can't like swim across. You had to take a ferry. So what would end up happening is people from like Philadelphia, New York would take stagecoaches all the way down to Perryville on the other side of the Susquehanna River, sleep for the night, cross the ferry, and then move out. Alternatively, what a lot of them did is cross the river, and then it was too dark to move out, so they would just stay in Havre de Grace. So kind of an early crossroads for a lot of the stuff in the government. But with that context aside, we can take it to the more, well, actually, I lied to you. Sorry, I'm an unreliable narrator. We need to talk about the Chesapeake campaign of the British in 1813. So we've been going a mile a minute about John O'Neill and Havre de Grace and stuff like that. Let's take a bop here to talk about what's happening in the context of what everything looked like the day of the raid, because that's what the episode is more or less about. So, two folks from the British Navy had been trawling the Chesapeake Bay for a few years. Okay, so the first one, Admiral Warren, is set up in the Caribbean. I don't know the guy personally, but if I had to pick between beautiful Maryland and the Caribbean, tough choice, but I'd probably do the Caribbean. So that's his base of operations. Then you've got a guy called Rear Admiral Cockburn. That's his real. I know. Get all the chuckles out. That's his real name. And he is the one who did most of the command and control during the Chesapeake campaign of 1813. Now, there's a lot more context here with the war, why the war, all of that kind of stuff for the War of 1812. A little bit too much for the scope of this. If anybody wants like reading material or anything like that, let me know in the comments. I've got some great ones that I can recommend. And maybe if you all should choose, we'll do another episode at some point. But all of that aside, in 1813, Cockburn is trying to force an attack on Washington and Baltimore. He's super aggressive. He is the quintessential, I will come into your country, burn your capital, kiss your mother on the mouth, and then leave. He is that guy. So anyway, we'll do another map overlay, but you can imagine he would come up from the mouth of the Chesapeake between the eastern shore of Virginia and Virginia proper, move up through rivers. Coming up the mouth of the river, he sees two things, right? As you're oriented there on the left side of the bay, there is the Potomac, there is the James, there is the Patuxent, and a few other rivers. And these rivers are big deals because they lead into inlands by way of getting to Baltimore, getting to Washington, Richmond, all of these really important economic hubs. So Cockburn's not dumb. What he wants to do is isolate and assault American strategic holds. Now, on the eastern side, the eastern shore, you've got places like Easton, St. Michael's, Tillman, and Kent Island. Okay, so on that side, you've got things like shipbuilders. There was a little bit of a blockade at this time, blockade runners, any number of things that would be a detriment to the British war effort. So Cockburn decides, I'm going to start raiding, and here's what I'm going to do. If you shoot at me, I'm going to burn your town down, I'm going to kill you, and then you're never going to shoot at me again. If you just let me in, I'm going to be cool, I'm going to take what I need, destroy any war material, and then move out. That is the story. Now, whether or not he would have just burned down a town for the sake of it, stay tuned for a future episode, because that's debatable. Now, past that. All throughout the spring of 1813, Cockburn had launched raids on multiple towns, right? So St. Michael's gets burned, not once, but twice. Kent Island gets occupied. Those are all on the eastern shore. On the western shore, the Patuxent gets blockaded, and the Potomac gets occupied very briefly. Not a lot of action in the Potomac. So then Cockburn says, okay, I know there is a specific ironworks at the top of the bay called the Principio Ironworks. That place produces all of the cannons for the U.S. Navy. I'm going to go there and burn it up. So that takes us, with that context, that takes us to May 3rd, 1813. And it takes us back to our hero, John O'Neill. So At this point, the Maryland militia, and this is the 42nd Regiment of Maryland Militia, the Harford County militia, they had been activated for the better part of a week at this point. So the guys are tired. I'm sure that most of you have read about militia before, or at least you've seen Mel Gibson's The Patriot, which, terrible historical movie, but the point is that the militia is unreliable. Don't get me started on The Patriot, but the point is...
You don't picture Mel Gibson running through the woods with his tomahawks flying.
But anyway, so the militia had been on alert for about a week. Nothing's really happening, right? The guys are tired. They want to go home. They're done with it. They don't care. They're not seeing anything. All the action is down south. So they start drinking, and any veterans in the audience or anybody that's ever been around the military, they drink, they get silly, and then usually nothing happens because you're not at war. But unfortunately for them, the next day, the British Navy shows up off Turkey Neck Point. Turkey Neck Point is an island where Aberdeen Proving Ground is today. So anyway, all of a sudden the British Navy shows up, and it's a real problem. Okay, so that morning, the morning of May 3rd, 1813, John O'Neill, who is a second lieutenant at the time in the militia, commissioned by the governor himself because of his Whiskey Rebellion and Navy experience, is manning a small battery at Concord Point. We'll put a photo up. That's where the lighthouse is today, which is actually pretty important to O'Neill's story. But he's manning a battery. Now, I'm going to do a shout-out to my source at the end of this, but the source specifically says that it was 2 6-pounder cannons and 1 9-pounder cannon. And yet, when I was digging through a few different articles and a few different sources, that was inversed, and it was 2 9-pounders and a 6-pounder. It really doesn't matter for the story, but just know that those small details are a little hazy. So anyway, O'Neill and about 2 other militiamen see the Navy, and at this point, Cockburn, the big ships have too deep of a draft to come onto coast. So Cockburn says, "Hey, I'm going to send some barges up. You Royal Marines get on the barges, go do something." So they do. So O'Neill sees him and says, "All right, I don't like this. Time to shoot at him." So he starts doing volley after volley from the cannon. The Royal Marines are taking fire. The fire is wildly inaccurate, and the British suffer no casualties. But the point is, now they've shot at the British. So now there's a problem. So the Royal Marine Commander sends word back to Cockburn's fleet. Cockburn's fleet starts shelling the absolute hell out of Havre de Grace and that battery specifically. They also start using these things, and this will be important in the War of 1812 series as we go on. They start using things called Congreve rockets. Imagine like a bottle rocket you put in a bottle and shoot off for the 4th of July. It's inaccurate, it's loud, but if you let it burn in your hand, it's dangerous. Same kind of thing. Unfortunately, one of the members of the town during this artillery duel got hit directly with a Congreve rocket. He died. So that didn't go well for him. Anyway, after about an hour of fighting back and forth, small arms fire at this point. The British are close enough where that goes down. O'Neill and his 2 militiamen are pretty well overrun at this point. One of the militiamen dies outright. Another one is wounded but not dead. O'Neill himself gets a musket ball, I believe, in his thigh. But I'll put up some text if that's not accurate. In any case, they bloody the British up a little bit. The commander of the Royal Marines gets shot through the hand with a musket ball. So I'm sure you can imagine he's kind of pissed. Anyway, so at this point, O'Neill is captured. So they take him to a prison ship they have out in the bay, HMS Maidstone, and his war is over. And so with O'Neill on the Maidstone, that pretty much seals Havre de Grace's fate. So again, Cockburn at this point is already furious that his Marines have been fired on. He's irritated that he even got fire in the first place. So his order is burn the town. They didn't comply with, in his mind, a lawful order, burn the town. And the British did. The British burned every single building in Havre de Grace with the exception of 4. Now, that's 4 by my primary source here, which, again, I'll give you the title of in a second. There is a little bit of an archaeological debate whether or not one more survived, but I don't think that it really matters in the scope of this. Most of the townspeople flee into various estates in the countryside. Anybody that was in the town, at least by the 3 primary sources we have of this happening, were not harmed, although I find that hard to believe personally, past my own belief. And back to our hero, O'Neill spends a while on this prison ship, and his niece goes with a party to negotiate for the release of the two or three prisoners from Havre de Grace on the Maidstone. And she's like 14, 15. She's super young. And Cockburn is so impressed with her that not only is O'Neill released, but she also gives him her tobacco box, which today is in the Maryland Historical Society's collection. So you can go there and see that today, which is super cool. I've told you all of this to say that a very small town in Maryland, at a very distant point in our history now, played a big part in the destruction that was 1813 for the American military in that war. Unfortunately, the raid on Havre de Grace would, like I said earlier, deny the Americans cannons from the Principio Iron Works, which were sorely needed. Not only that, but it would more or less lock down the Chesapeake Bay to the British, which is exceedingly unfortunate because this, not directly, but this did precipitate the attack and burning of Washington. And, for a W note, the attack and failure of that attack on Baltimore. But in any case, this would lock down the Chesapeake Bay for the British for pretty much the remainder of the war. All of the history aside, if you're still with us, thank you. I like my history. I hope somebody out there does, but I know it's not everybody's thing. So let's talk a little bit about the site. We went out there, we saw it.
Yeah. So coming from the perspective of someone who, well, first and foremost, being from Pennsylvania, doesn't know a hoot or what about who this man is or what he had done throughout the course of our history, or what even this town that I used to drive through every day on my way to work was burned to the ground, razed because of the actions that they took on that day that Joe was speaking about earlier. Driving down there, it was a few weeks back from the time that we're recording this now, and being able to see it's become a beautiful park now, historical landmark. Though there's a lighthouse there that did or did not exist at the time. I'm assuming did not.
It did not. But a small vignette, not to interrupt Andrew. Let me just wrap up John O'Neill's story for you guys. It'll be quick, I know. So John O'Neill, after that, when that lighthouse was built in the 1820s, the U.S. government was so appreciative of him holding the line at Havre de Grace, he became something of like a propaganda piece for the Americans at the time. Anyway, he was named lighthouse keeper for that Concord Point lighthouse. Stay tuned for a future episode on that. And his family continued to maintain that all the way until the 1920s when it became automated. So,
okay.
It still ties into the main character.
Yeah, so there's the lighthouse there that you just got that nice little bit of information on, which is still maintained. As far as I'm aware, you can walk into it during certain points when they have it opened up for the public to tour and visit. In that same area, there's also the Maritime Museum is right there within, I'd say, a 2-minute walk.
Yep.
Easy parking, wonderful for strolling around. They've got awesome wood carvings. There's even some replicas of the 9-pounders and the 6-pounders that Joe was talking about earlier. And it's these little things that, to me, what this channel is really supposed to be all about, where, you get someone like myself who has no idea about any of this. And, I could just be walking along, talk to some Maryland native over here across the way, take a stroll down there on the way to go grab a beer maybe, and, stop in the park and you'll learn something about American history that otherwise it would just be lost and forgotten in many respects. But yeah, I thought it's a wonderfully maintained area, and it was quite interesting to learn about, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. A few more shout-outs for Havre de Grace, like different waypoints if you do find yourself there. So like Andy said, Concord Lighthouse Park. I think it has another name, but I can't remember it. But if you type in Concord Lighthouse on like maps or whatever, you'll get there. Anyway, directly behind the lighthouse is the lighthouse keeper's house. John O'Neill and his family lived in that for about 100 years. Not him specifically. But
Obviously not him for 100 years straight.
lighthouse must have been... Anyway, and his descendants lived there. And then about a street or two away was his nail factory, which I didn't mention it earlier.
Acrylic?
Nah, yeah. So go get your manicure at Johnny O'Neill's. Yep. So, also, if you go to Havre de Grace, shout out, not sponsors of this video yet, hopefully someday. Anyway, Coakley's Pub. I like the pumpkin ale there when they have it. At the time of recording, it's not going to be a thing, but in any case, if you're ever there, stop by. There's a bunch of great places in that area too. There's also a fudge shop. Bomb Boys? I think it's Bomb Boys. If you're there and it's Bomb Boys.
Yeah, it's quite a nice little town. There's a lot of things to do. You can make a nice day of it. If you and the family just want to tour around, and maybe the old man or something in the family's into the history, but the kids like the ice cream and all that other stuff. There's plenty of things to do there. There's a nice marina. Fishing's available so long as you got your license. I think there's even
license free on the
license pier. Free right there on the pier. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. But definitely check into it before you do it.
Oh yeah, please don't leave me angry comments because it was like you need a license. That's my bad.
Yeah, but overall, it's a nice little area. I think it's a good way to start up these series here that we're going to be expanding on over the coming weeks. As you can tell, Joe is definitely much more in tune with the Maryland side of history here.
I am the Maryland Time Explorer.
Yes, he is. But yeah, I just want to say thanks for joining us today. Hope everybody that tuned in to the end, thanks. Hope you learned something. And I know I did, most definitely. And well, I hope to see you out there and about at some of these local historical sites as we travel around Maryland and see these sites for ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. Stay tuned for a few here for beers if that's your jam. I'll also include ciders. I feel like a lot of people like ciders, but that's all right. So I just wanted to do a quick thing here before I sign out and say for future reading, the primary source that I used is called Havre de Grace in the War of 1812, Fire on the Chesapeake. And I'm going to butcher this name. I'm really sorry if you ever listen. I really enjoyed your book. Heidi Glatfighter. Anyway, she did a really great job, and it really helped me kind of guide where I wanted this episode to go. So definitely appreciate that.
We'll put a link to the actual book down below in the description, as well as the author's name and title of the book with the ISBN as well, so that you can search it up at your local library or anything else.
Totally. All right, guys, I appreciate you sticking around, and I hope to see you on other explorations. I was Joe. Take care.
Have a good one.